Hi everyone, welcome back. So last week we had a pretty good week and I saw a lot of great assignments come in again, and I appreciate everybody's work and citation quality. This week I want to address kind of the business side and the impact of the business process analysis in that area. A lot of scholars, and you'll see in citations you guys will be looking up the term MTO, or maximum tolerable outage. When you think about this, the idea in mind comes to, is there any tolerable outage at all? Well, unfortunately, in business models, a lot of the business concepts come into the idea of actually assessing the impact on the amount of tolerance of what you will be able to do to sustain business and keep in operation, not just eliminating totally. So we have to look at what are the critical objectives inside of this tolerable outage situation. When we say critical objectives, if you think about a streamlining, and I always go back to Ford Motor Company a lot of times because I like the idea of the processing plant and working through shifts to create a product at the end of the line. You can visualize this line. When we think about it, it's the product at the end, the car. So the critical objective would be making sure every station on the line, whether it's adding the wheels, the doors, the paint, or whatever material is assessed in building a car, meets the end objective of building the car and having it running and test driven and out to the sales floor somewhere. There is always the question of the backlog inside those. What if one key part, one cog in that wheel, is subjective to an impact? And you have to prioritize each one to understand where you place the most emphasis on being able to shift all your workforce to getting it back in line, that the others can be subjectively held up and not hurt the entire line process. These are the critical points in that process. Maybe it's the facilitation of a code inside of the new software you're building or the app you're building for your company so that Salesforce can actually access in real time on an application anywhere in the field how much product there is to sell. If something faults there, you have to assess what's the key part that you would administer to most of your workforce. And we remember that from the last section, your workforce objectives. So it's prioritizing each section and looking at how the maximum outage, is what a lot of people call it, for a lack of a better term, can be assessed and impacted to where you can shift work to put it over. And this is part of the plan, and you would build that strategically for the critical objectives. This is all part of that recovery functionality, understanding how to place your resources in the correct manner, in the correct state, and giving all your constituents and stakeholders the plan so they understand, hey, if the employees section here goes down in our line, we would have to immediately shift all the workforce here to get this moving so that the critical objectives are happening, the backlog is stopped. You can look at this at time, as a lot of ways business models will look at it, because they think time is always the money. Every second that's down on a line is time for a car not being produced. So it may be framed out in time as the objective. One of the key spots might be the most time consuming aspect that you'd want to work in, if it's the coding area, or if it's installing the hardware into a new business or a place of operation, or if it gets struck by lightning, replacing those parts and having secondary parts close by instead of having to cross town or have something shipped in for new computers. You would probably want to have a backup computer system, maybe 3 or 4 in a box. So if one area of your business gets struck, immediately IT can come in and change out, swap computers, get it back online and moving fast. But if you have them stored across town, that's wasting time. So these are little elements of a plan you'd want to think about. They're looking at the unscheduled interruptions as well. And we say the unscheduled, but maybe the government comes in and shuts you down for a health concern. Air quality is bad in the building that you're renting from. Water gets stricken. These are all unscheduled interruptions that can happen. And you have to plan for these. What would happen? Can we get people to work off of laptops immediately and all leave the building and go to Starbucks across the street and get wireless and keep working? If they're data entry people? What are the key requirements to keep people moving? This would be a list that you'd have to have in your critical objectives. If you're working with a team of software developers, what do they need to actually do their job remotely if they're removed from the business area? What dependencies do they have? Do they have to have a stationary hard desktop? Do they have to have something to correct for tendonitis in their hands or their arms or wrists? Do you have to have special chairs for a handicapped individual on staff or special desk? How would you manage all this? These are the little parts that you'd have to think about in your plan. And they operate with big impacts on one individual, can flow down through the whole entire process and cause a larger backlog. There's always legal and financial impacts as well here if you don't address this. And I say this because of handicapped individuals, employees. It's a hard gray area because the government has very strict rules and regulations to make sure everybody is accounted for and has equality in their workforce and their abilities. So you have to make sure those plans are assessed in your business model too for continuing if there is any impact. If you're going to a remote location, you have to make sure there's handicap accessibility bathrooms, for instance, or ramps to get into a building. You have to make sure that everybody has accessibility equally. This has to be looked into the model for your backup plans. This is where I bring in that human impact era. They're not just key positions we're looking to replace or build, but sometimes they're little things that can cause a backup inside of the plan that you have to account for. Human resources usually helps you with these ideas because they have functionality reports, and they also have government regulations and people who specialize inside of this. If you're looking to shift one person to another job perspective to help in that backlog situation, in an impact situation, you have to understand everything that's needed for that employee. Maybe it's a translator. Maybe it's making sure there's software on a computer to translate English to German if you're working with a global corporation, Japanese to English. These are all things you have to think about and make sure every machine has the ability to download, say from the cloud, the software they need, and everybody has access points. They're little key things. I brought up before the idea of death of a leader or a peer. And I bring this up again because a lot of times plans eliminate this idea. It's the human impact area because mental capacities of each person can be subjective. One person might be impacted more by the death of another. If you have a charismatic leader, which I've worked for many, and they get fired, which is my one that I just did work for, was a wonderful man, very charismatic. And we all appreciated everything he said. He assessed everything, took great value, knew everyone's name in a company, had over 800 employees, could say your name. He took pride in that. When he was fired, we were devastated. There was an actual area of gray. We didn't know where we were going. We lost our vision because our vision was in his sights and his motivations. We listened to him with great care. So when this happened, entire team suffered. We didn't feel our tasks were important anymore because we felt that our tasks were important because he came to us. Every couple of days we would see the man, he would thank us for doing our jobs and say how important, and he knows that the little aspect we're doing is for the greater good of the entire team and the organization. But when he was lost, we all felt depressed. We all suffered independently. We talked about it secretly to try to give us pep talks. But the company never brought back any help for us, never let them understand that we needed more than just resume your job. This is a human resources aspect now. You need to work, you need to be here 8 to 4, you can have your hour lunch break. We needed more. They should have brought in counselors. And this is something that would have to be built in the plan. The what if this happens? How do you handle this? If there is a terrorism strike, how do you handle the people? What do you do for them? Do you bring in counselors? Do you bring in home counselors? Do you bring in group sessions where you get everyone there? We ended up asking for help in assessing this problem by creating our whole team as a getaway. We all went away for a weekend together. We asked the company to help us pay for hotel stays and food. We bought hoagies, we brought pop, we brought potato chips, and we made a picnic. And we spent 3 days together, and we got ourselves a leadership coach to get us back on track. And from this, we framed out what our key roles are, what everything we needed to do to assess, to get the job done, and what was the most important things we needed done. They brought us back and we empowered ourselves as a team. But this was something that my team had to do. And our leader, which we had as the vice president then, agreed with this. She was a great person, great leader as well. And she decided to let us do this when we approached her. And she came on board. She brought her family, her kids. We played kickball together at nights. And during the days we met and we talked and we expressed our feelings and emotions and allowed everybody to have an understanding of what this man meant and how we can move on. And we ended up seeing our new leader as our vice president. And we moved forward from that guidance, and that person was empowered. And she was an awesome leader. And then she got fired. And then we started the process all over again because we already learned. Because we learned that was what needed to be implemented in our personal plans and our team plan for our silo and our division. But that was there. So we had a great project leader at that point who went right back to that plan and said, look, this happened before. I know we're going to spiral, gang. Let's all get away. Let's everybody take a vacation day on Friday and go. So this is something different. Crisis communication in those, I'm going to bring it up one more time, is a key aspect, because when you lose these people and you have the death, you have the leaders gone, they are fired, and you will have this happen in your careers. What do? There has to be something in the plan that says this person needs to take over. These elements need to get to this person. Everybody in charge has to come up and put into that church and make sure everybody is on the same page and expressing the same information. Companies like Ford, GE, large ones, Westinghouse, all have these impact factors for crisis communication. One company I worked for, without expressing the name, had a policy in place that everyone had to sign every 6 months. And understanding that if there's any crisis communication, you signed off understanding the only person you're allowed to talk to is your crisis communication person. You immediately assessed what was happening in your role, where you were in the job and the project, and you brought a report to that person, that key stakeholder in the crisis communication plan, and that leader for each department then brought it to the crisis control communicator, who talked to the public, who talked to the stakeholders, who talked to the board. This is a key element that should be brought into every single plan as well. And you should be considering this in your final projects too. So critical impacts. These are the places that have the most influence. There's kind of 4 stages is what your book and some scholars look at this. The critical ones are the ones that stop. If it's not happening, nothing's happening. Putting that wheel on the car in Ford Motor Cars production line. Adding the next level is the essential functions. What are the essential functions if we think about them? It's time to recover. Maybe it's looking at the legal aspects. If you're looking at that line again, maybe the essential function is making sure the air quality is fine if there's fire. Imagine how destructive a fire can be to a business. A lot of people don't like to think about the natural destructions that can happen. You can't just walk back in a building if there's a fire. You have to have a fire inspector come in and make sure the electric is safe so another fire will not happen. Make sure that the water and sprinkler system will activate if there is another fire that happens. These are all essential functions that must happen before work can resume. Necessary functions again are making sure the hardware would work, that the electricity is supplied to each station, that the computers are booted correctly, there's no damage done to them. Software protection is updated if there is an actual critical threat happening or an attack through cyber. And desirable functions might be that your comfortable chair that got burned in the fire is replaced as quick as possible. You might have a regular chair that's hard, but you get back to that 5-prong or organic function, ergonomic chair that makes your comfort level better. These are desirable functions. Or maybe it's a new set of gloves on the work line inside Ford Motor Company's plans. Or maybe it's new eyeglass wear if they're wearing down and getting scratched and you're working in hardware situations and soldering. So these are desirable functions. So different levels of impact, and you still have to assess these little things and make a plan for each one of them. And these are 4 areas you should address in your plan for your final papers too, or any plan. So maximum tolerable downtime, MTD. Companies look at this and say, how long can we survive? This is what the key is. How long can we tolerate the absence of our key coder without having to hire someone else if the person gets cancer and needs cancer treatments? If they're in a car crash and out? If something happens on this line? If our computer goes down? Our whole system goes down? Our network goes down? How long can we work offline? How long can our sales force go without having real-time functionality to check everything that's needed for a client, from shipping times to how many parts are available in the storeroom? These data points are all tolerable, but without them, how long can we stand this? If there is something unavailable, how long will it take to get it shipped in? What would you have to do? These are all downtime issues. If there's something wrong with the process or the functionality because of a cyber attack that you're locked, what would happen if your computers are attacked today, which is a very extreme, but does happen with pirates, where they come in and they take over your entire computer system and your network and lock it down till you pay. You pay a large fee, a ransom, to get back your system. What do you need? How long can you tolerate this? Can you allow law enforcement 2-3 weeks to go and try to save your system before you look at the business financial aspect and say it is more profitable for us to pay the pirates and walk away from this than to try to capture them and get our system back? These are issues that a lot of business financial planners think about. They look at the tolerable downtime on things that are obscure. What if piracy did happen? What if you're working in a bank? And the banking system we know today is all run on IT products. It's all zeros and ones. But what happens if your bank is held hostage? There are still people who rob banks today. They come in with guns blazing and masks on. What happens? How do you deal with this whole process? Because your process is stopped while you deal with this. Well, first you'd think safety of the individuals, give them what they want to get them out the door. Yes, maybe that lasts an hour. Maybe it lasts 7 days. Maybe it lasts a month if they're in there and they're staying frozen and police are outside and they refuse to give up. Maybe the situation is more about how you retrain your individuals that work for you, getting them back being safe mentally, allowing them to come back into a situation where they're already scared to come back into. These are all aspects of the process and the function you have to think about. How you get your workforce back together. It's frightening. Terrorism is real, and it's part of the things you have to think about in your plan. If there is a terrorist attack, there is a physical attack. How do you get this back on track? How do you get your workforce motivated to be back into a building and understand they're safe? Is it implementing new safety values, new silent alarm systems, key-coded alarms off of your computer if you're in a banking, touch with your foot? Is there codes that you can have to teach each other symbols so that one teller would know there's something wrong, and without hearing a verbal expression, touching your ear? Just like a baseball coach says to the players, bunt instead of hit. There's a sign, there's a signal. Touch my ear, touch my nose. These are things you might have to build into your plan for a safety idea, a signal system. It's not unheard of today. Many good security issues and security planners inside of all these tolerable risk areas think about implementing plans like this ahead of time. This might be something you would think about too for your plan. Remember, it's not just the system, it's work recovery that makes all this happen. If work is not able to be done by physical humans, there is no more work being done. You are still in downtime. Recovery point objectives, again, we started talking about, really comes back to that work recovery time, the WRT. How long can you stand a data loss? We can measure this, and I started talking about it with Hubbard last week, and I asked you guys to kind of read over and listen to some of his other speeches online. There's some YouTubes out there that are pretty cool. You can look at the duration of time that's acceptable, the toleration time period, and figure this out in measurement. You can understand the loss of shipping. You can understand the loss of being able to communicate with functionality if someone goes down. If you have a workforce that's sick, you lose a president. You can do this through testing and live testing. I told you before about my firewall plans I always build in, and I constantly do this throughout each milestone. This is something to think about and adding this in there. Do a workforce time recovery plan. Walk in, shut the lights off in the room where all your coders are working, so you just lost power. What do? Activate our plan. Time it. See how long it takes the stress level to come down, everybody to get into a functionality, and go through the plan and the steps. While you're doing this, qualitatively take notes on things that are errors and things that people did wrong. And then go back and have a meeting and assess all these errors. Then go back and build them into your plan and re-communicate your new plan to get this recovery point back on objective. Determining impacts have a lot of different aspects. We've been talking about financial, yes. How long does it take to recover financially from losing all of your hardware? You have to reinvest in all this. Did you have a safeguard built inside? What if you lost your customers? We see many businesses, and we saw Tylenol as a case study before, where they had cyanide in their product. It took 4 years to rebuild a public relations campaign to get people to trust Tylenol again. And they got their system back. They got their quality back and their market space. They had to have their stakeholders and suppliers and everyone understand that they needed this time for public opinion to be clean. These are things you have to determine and impact. How long would it take you? A lot of them are measurable. Some of them are undeterminate. How long would it take to replace an employee that you lose? How long does it take to get your credibility back if you're Tylenol? It took them 4 years. Could your business sustain 4 years of loss? How do you deal with public relations? Do you have a team ready for crisis control? Do you have key stakeholders that communicate the needs to those critical communication people? This is part of your plan. Who is your legal regulatory person? How do they deal with this? How do you communicate and make sure you're on track? If you're having environmental impacts, what would you do? Look at Shell today. They're building a new plant in a couple places. One was Pittsburgh, where they're dealing with a new invention. They're already looking at environmental impacts and how they would sustain the business if they are fined or if they have work stoppage. We saw this earlier in Shell Corporation in Parkersburg, West Virginia, about 1993 when the plant blew up. They had a gigantic environmental impact in the Mid-Ohio Valley. They had to assess the damage and rebuild their entire public relations aspect and credibility to not only the employees to make sure they can come into a chemical plant to be safe to work, but the community. It took years to build that relationship back up in many of plans with people coming out and talking to community leaders and church groups. These are all things that you would want to consider for that action type of plan. We saw oil spills along the coast a few years ago to where employees had to go and clean up from the oil animals and help them. They had to clean up the shores, capture the released oil from the broken rig. Operational impacts are usually the easiest to deal with. They're a functionality of hardware in a lot of cases. But that social corporate image is one of the hardest things to come back. We looked at Occupy. Look how it strangled the banking industries, changed the way they function and think about crisis communication and control. When hundreds of people are sleeping outside your building for months on end, it never goes away. What do you do to appease these people, to get them back? Community and accountability is one of the largest things you have to think about in your impact plans. How do you handle this? If it's an environmental concern, what about your green IT program? How do you communicate that to the program, to the community? Do you put out ads where green? Maybe instead of throwing hardware away, you recycle it and give it to local libraries, to local communities, that are poor, or school districts that need the extra equipment. This is community accountability and green IT aspects that should be in a plan. So business impacts not just the functionality, as we said, but the person, employees, and the community. When we're looking at those maximum tolerable outages, the MTOs, we have to look inside of them. It's never just one aspect, it's multiple aspects inside of each. Think of a tier system. If you say my hardware is down, it's not just your hardware, it's everything. What goes inside of this? So I hope this made you think a little bit more. Start thinking about those little tiers inside of the other tiers. I hope you build some of these concepts into your business final plan that we're doing for our final papers. And I look forward to everybody next week. Thanks a lot, gang. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Get out there, enjoy some of the sunshine. Do something for yourself. Read a good book. Go for a run. Ride a bike. Spend some time with your children. Spend some time with a good friend. Everything's not work. Have a great day.